Greetings everyone and welcome to the Law and Finance Virtual Open Day. My name is Dan Ari. I am the Director of the Law and Finance program here at Oxford. And I'm here today with two of our current students who I will turn to in a minute. Let me tell you a few things about what we're going to do today before we get down to the nitty-gritty business of answering your questions about what it's like to be on the Law and Finance program and what your year at Oxford would be like. And the first thing I want to say is that if you are currently on the WebEx program, you should have the ability to type in questions that myself and our students can then take a look at a little later on and get back to you with sort of some live feedback. We will also have the opportunity to answer any questions that we don't get to in today's broadcast via email in due course. So start putting your questions in now, get yourself in the queue, and we'll come back a little later on to some of those questions. I'm going to start by providing some information about the MLF program, both the structure and content of the program, and a little bit about how the year progresses from an academic perspective and what ultimately the goals of the course are. I then have some questions for our students, many of which will really, I think, attempt to anticipate some of the questions that you no doubt have about what it's like to be on the program, the motivations for joining the program, and what they hope to do after they leave. Then it's over to you, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we possibly can within the relevant time frame before closing up. So let's take a look then, and if the technology works properly, you should have in front of you now something of a timetable. And what this timetable shows is the progression of courses throughout your year on the MLF program. At Oxford, we divide the year into three terms: Michaelmas term, which runs from October to December; Hilary term, which runs from January through to the middle of March; and Trinity term, which just started yesterday, which runs from the end of April through to the middle of June. So Michaelmas, Hilary, Trinity term. You'll learn a whole new calendar system, if nothing else, while you spend a year at Oxford. During Michaelmas term, there are two core courses that you will embark on. Those courses are corporate finance, or finance, and financial economics. These are the core courses that have been drawn out of the business school curriculum and adapted for a law and finance course, specifically for the MLF. The purpose of finance is really to introduce you to basic concepts in corporate finance. So starting with the idea of discounted cash flow and indeed what the financing decisions of firms are, and working the way up towards the capital asset pricing model and other topics in corporate finance and asset valuation. Sitting alongside that is then first principles of financial economics. The way to think about this then is as a complement to both finance, but then importantly, the theoretical lodestar of everything else we do in the course, whether it be subsequent courses in law and economics of corporate transactions or principles of financial regulation. First Principles of Financial Economics is designed to do just that, to provide you with the first principles that you then apply in other contexts to analyze legal rules or to understand in greater practical detail different types of financing structures, different types of firms, different types of businesses. FPFE, First Principles of Financial Economics, runs just for Michaelmas term. It's a one-term, 8-week, very intensive course. Finance runs for both Michaelmas and Hilary term. And so you'll get a series of assessments in Michaelmas term on the basis of FPFE, and then assessments in Hilary term for finance. Now, there is a third core course that is part of the program that then picks up where FPFE left off, called the Law and Economics of Corporate Transactions. This is sort of the capstone component of the course, and the basic idea is to take the theoretical insights from financial economics and see how well they work in explaining deal structures and the structure of different types of firms in the real world. One of the key insights is that, well, sometimes these concepts are highly probative to understanding the way that transactions in firms work. Other times they're at best incomplete frameworks for understanding these types of contexts. This course runs from Hilary term to Trinity term. In Hilary term, we effectively keep it closed to the class. We analyze theoretical concepts against relatively confined case studies that the instructors on the course have developed, ranging from everyday case studies like buying or selling a used car, or very mundane daily transactions, towards more sophisticated corporate transactions. During Trinity term, then, we sort of flip the script and have the students analyze real-world transactions on the basis of the documentation that was actually used to codify those deals. So the students will give a 1-hour presentation giving their analysis on the basis of the theoretical portion of the course of why a deal was done, why it was structured the way that it was, and how it might have been structured better. To make this particularly interesting, especially from my perspective and those of my colleagues, that presentation is given not only to the classmates, but also to the practitioners who undertook the transaction in question, who then provide feedback to the students on their analysis and tell us what they think were the most important and interesting aspects of these deals, both from a legal and an economic perspective. So those three courses together, Finance, First Principles of Financial Economics, and LECT, the Law and Economics of Corporate Transactions, are then the core curriculum on the MLF. Everybody takes it. Everybody really works through on the same time frame these three courses. At this point, then, there is a possibility for specialization depending on which path you choose. On the one hand, there's a path that we might call the law stream, which enables you to take 2 elective courses out of the existing BCL MJUR curriculum. So these include, or at least popular electives for MLF students include things like Principles of Financial Regulation, Corporate Finance, Comparative Corporation Law, Legal Concepts in Financial Law, Competition Law. You get to choose any 2 of those throughout the year, and you would take the exact same course, including the lectures, seminars, and vigorous tutorials that are a core part of the teaching on the BCL MJUR program. The other stream that you can take is the finance stream. The finance stream combines 1 elective from the BCL MJUR curriculum along with 2 courses from the finance curriculum. One, a specialized course in corporate valuation. The second, an elective course drawn from a series of 4 or 5 electives, ranging from things like private equity, asset management, topics in finance and investment. Here, this is a course that we're now offering in its 2nd year. By the time that you arrive, it'll be in its 3rd year. This is really a student-led sort of response to demands for additional finance content on the MLF. And for those that do take it, these are ultimately people who are, I think, are contemplating either careers in finance or who want to get up to speed on some of the more cutting-edge transactional topics as opposed to simply the core theoretical debates in law and finance. So those are the 2 streams. We have the core courses, we have the law stream with 2 law electives, and the finance stream with 1 law elective, corporate valuation, and 1 finance elective. And in the Q&A, and perhaps the students will say more about this as well, there'll be an opportunity to sort of hash out and debate the merits, the opportunities, and the potential sort of challenges of each of these choices. But for now, this is sufficient, I think, to give you guys a sense of the overall structure of the way that the course works. Now, in addition to telling you something about the way the course works, I thought I would at least, I suppose, anticipate some of your questions about other aspects of the MLF, specifically careers. So you should have a slide in front of you now that sort of gives a breakdown for the 2014-15 cohort of the destinations of MLF students after they graduated. And what you'll see here pretty clearly, I think, is that quite a few of our students go into legal practice, mostly in large law firms, mostly, or at least the modal distribution would be for law firms in the City of London. That said, increasingly on the MLF, I'm delighted to see a broader range of careers showing up on this list on a year-over-year basis, and certainly for the cohort that we have this year, even more so, although for obvious reasons we don't have the finalized figures yet. Our students are going into, as we can see on this slide, not only law firms, but also investment banks, asset managers, consulting, accounting firms. We're always very proud, if I can go back a couple of slides, that 6 in 2014-15 went into further study. And of those 6, I think 3 or 4 of them are actually still with us at Oxford, working towards a doctorate in law and finance. This slide here tells us a little bit of something about the change in geographic location of our students both before and after the program. So for many of you, you might be looking at the MLF as a way of entering a new jurisdiction for a legal career. Specifically, you might be thinking about entering the City of London, either in law or in finance. And this chart sort of tells us what we can tell you about what those transitions have looked like over the last few years, and specifically for 2014-15. And what we can see most strikingly here, obviously, is that in 2014-15 we had 1 UK student, but 16 of our 45 students, or 44 students I think this sample has in it, ended up staying in the UK for the purposes of their career after the MLF concluded. Most of those 16 were in training contract positions with city law firms. I suspect that more than a few of you will have questions about the lateral hire market in London, which is something that we can come back to later on if people are interested in talking about that. So that's sort of an overview of both the structure of the course and careers destinations. And next I'm going to turn it over to our 2 students to talk about their experience on the MLF and to answer a few questions that I've handily prepared for them. So first, in addition to introducing yourselves and saying a little bit about for our audience who you are and why you're here, why did you both decide to study on the MLF?
You want to start, please?
Sure. So I did my LLB in Lancaster University, already in the UK, and I had done some work experience beforehand. And what I noticed is that during this work experience, during these internships, I was gaining commercial awareness, but it was more of a superficial commercial awareness. And I really wanted to go into the industry and really understand what the financial background was. And so that's why I decided to look into the MLF and why I was excited about the prospect.
Tom?
Thank you. Well, I hold a Bachelor and Masters of Law, and I've also worked for American Law in Germany, but I've no real exposure to finance. Though I was quite sure I wanted to join legal practice, my real idea was to get a unique combination of law and non-law courses, and particularly the MLF's emphasis on finance also convinced me to join it. I was really looking for a graduate course that was focused yet interdisciplinary, and which could give me a comparative advantage in the applications for law firms. Potentially also I thought of joining, for instance, consultancy, if some of you might consider that, or banks, and I thought that with my background the MLF would be the best program to prepare me for that.
Next question, what's it like studying on the MLF? And maybe more specifically, what do you think have been the best and conversely most challenging aspects of your year at Oxford on the MLF?
So for me, most challenging was honestly the first course, as you mentioned, First Principles of Financial Economics, because that's the course where you're completely immersed in this financial perspective and you're really learning, I guess, how economists or how they think. And so that was challenging, but also the most rewarding, and it's why I decided to do the MLF in the first place, because it provides you with the broader environment in which we will be working, and then it helps you become a better lawyer because you're able to be predictive about what's happening. You understand the roots of the economy and the environment in which you're working. So that was most challenging and then also most rewarding. And then I chose the finance stream as well, which was also very difficult, but I think we'll talk about that in a bit too.
We will, and actually, because our first question's on this, do you have a background in quantitative finance at all?
I don't, not
and
at all.
How have you found the finance stream?
I found it,
in light of that.
again, challenging, but I was able to handle it. Because you're taking the finance course for the first 2 terms, that gives you almost the same kind of financial knowledge that the MBAs have, so you're able to understand what is going on in the courses, and then you're able to, piece it together and understand what's happening and be able to talk to the MBAs and take the course without feeling completely overwhelmed. It's challenging, but it's definitely feasible and fun.
Right. Now, I absolutely agree with that, and I'd say by all means the MLF is an intellectually challenging program now, and I do hope that all of you are looking for that by having applied to the MLF in the first place. At the same time, it is rewarding in the sense that you're going to be provided with cutting-edge knowledge at the intersection of law and finance, and that means both within economics and finance and law. So I always imagined the MLF to really consist of 3 core parts, and that's the economic bit, the finance bit, and the legal part of it. And on top of that, you have the EdCT course, which this year is run by Dan, but next year probably by someone else, which will then try to further integrate this. However, let me emphasize 3 points that I noted down that I think are particularly important or particular characteristic about the MLF. The first one is the interconnectedness of disciplines in all the core courses. There are several graduate programs, I believe, that claim to not only teach law but also something else, but very often so in parallel. The MLF, on the other hand, is unique in the sense that it integrates questions of economics, finance, and law in one course at the same time. So you're not only able to discuss them in parallel with 2 different people, but actually one person at the same time discusses them. And this is an exceptional advantage that I thought I could not get from any other program, for instance. Secondly, then, the combination of theoretical concepts and practical insight. Again, you're going to be provided with the challenging theory and concepts that Elizabeth has talked about. At the same time, you be able to apply them in LSCT and also in corporate valuation then to real-world case studies. For instance, this time actually, that's what we need to do the next couple of weeks, is to value Gatwick. What's the value of Gatwick? I find that extremely interesting.
And I should say, at this point as well, first of all, remind everybody that we've got a couple of questions in the queue so far, but this is really all about your questions, so keep them coming. And just in response to something that Tom said, yes, I have historically taught the course in Law and Economics of Corporate Transactions, but thankfully for me, and actually thankfully for you, I will be on sabbatical next year. Why is that thankful for you? Well, because Professor John Armour, who many of you will know, will be taking over the teaching for me in Law and Economics of Corporate Transactions. And the opportunity to learn from John and to work with John is worth the price of admission on the MLF alone. Next question for you guys. What do you ultimately hope to get out of studying on the MLF?
So, like I said, I chose the MLF because I wanted to be a better lawyer and I wanted to increase my commercial awareness and gain a better understanding of the environment and also client incentives. So that's what I hope to get out of it practically, academically, and I really have. I've FPFE, LECT, they all help you put things in a different, through the financial perspective and in a different context. So that was really good. The other thing that I wasn't expecting to gain from the MLF, but I ended up gaining was a network. The MLF kind of cohort is really close-knit and diverse. So you have these friends who are all coming from multiple jurisdictions and different work experiences, and they're all your friends, so you're able to gain different understandings and interact with them in a really close-knit way, which is different to, I think, other courses such as the BCL and MDRA here or other courses in other universities. And so that's why I like the MLF kind of community. It's one of the advantages that I didn't see happening beforehand.
But for me, it was on the one hand side to understand corporate transactions, and I mean this in a broad sense, so both the finance and the corporate side of it, beyond its legal aspects. Having worked at a law firm, I did get in touch with the legal aspects of it, of the legal questions that you have to answer and concern yourself with as a lawyer. But very few of them involved actual understanding what this transaction involves, what's the purpose behind it. And as a lawyer, I thought this is not always, but very often essential to be a good lawyer. And I wanted to get a theoretical foundation in these sort of skills and knowledge before I would actually do these transactions myself. In a nutshell, I think you could say I was looking for a head start to a legal career in London, and I'm feeling well prepared with the MLF for that. Secondly, then, we are only 46 of us, so it is really not a close community, but it's a community. Well, supervised by then, I suppose. So we do form, we do have our sort of bi-termly drinks, which we casually convene and always meet each other for lunch, have our courses together.
And our core courses are all together.
Absolutely.
So you naturally form a community.
Yeah. That's quite different, for instance, to the MJOR and other courses, where you are scattered around different options, electives, depending on what you chose. So you're gonna have a very nice network afterwards in London, as Dan showed you, 16 joined London, but also beyond these borders. Maybe one more point, and then I'd be really hoping to answer some questions from your side, is that the MLF is narrower and wider than many other graduate programs. It is narrower in that it focuses on corporate transactions. Again, I mean the finance bit of it and the corporate bit of it. But it is also wider in that within this field, it enables you to understand different aspects of it, particularly the incentives, which you might want to call it the economics of it, but also the finance, the theory behind it. So it exposes you to a narrower ex ante field of the legal side, but within this legal side or legal sphere of corporate transactions, it is very broad and very holistic in its approach.
Great, thank you very much, guys. And we do have some questions here, both for you and for me. And a couple of them relate to the all-important question, will we be offering the finance stream next year? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. So start thinking about now which option you want to choose. And if you have specific questions as you sort of think about how to choose between the two, by all means, please do fire them into the queue or follow up with us after the fact, and we can help people sort of frame the decision that they're making when it comes to the law electives versus the finance electives. You all clearly were hoarding your questions until we were done the earlier part. We've just gotten a explosion of questions here. So let's just go through some of them. Next question, how likely, and I'm just going to read them out loud, quiz style, I suppose. How likely would you estimate the possibility of working as an in-house lawyer after completing the course? Who could be the possible employers? So each year, a small percentage of our graduates go into in-house counsel work. By far the most common route for people who do want to go in-house is actually to go work in a law firm and then jump ship over to the client side after a couple of years effectively. However, we've had some fantastic successes placing people right out of the MLF. One of our former students landed a job as senior transactional counsel for a big ethical investment fund. Several others have gone on primarily to in-house counsel roles in asset management firms and investment banks, for which I think the course is a particularly good incubator. The common denominator there is that for the most part the in-house counsel positions are in financial services, saying that after financial services, interestingly, the second biggest sort of absorber of MLF talent on the in-house side is actually energy firms, so oil and gas suppliers, providers, buyers, sellers, and the like. So it's a very small percentage, so it's difficult to say what the actual probability would be, not least because I don't have the denominator in terms of how many applications were made. But it is certainly a way that our former students have gone on immediately following the MLF into these sorts of roles. Next question. Do recruiters approach MLF students with past work experience differently in terms of affording them opportunities to join firms laterally as opposed to training contracts? The answer here, and this is a very common question, and I hope all 27 of you currently on the call sort of are paying attention at this point and not eating popcorn at your desk or something like that. Well, you can continue to eat popcorn, but you've just got to be listening. Different firms approach this differently. The lateral hire market into the United Kingdom is extremely intense and generally quite bespoke. What firms are looking for depends on their specific needs, and because of that, from their perspective, going in and doing some sort of generalized recruitment into academic institutions is not particularly economical. We've tried to do then two things to help get our students a leg up in the lateral hire market. The first one is our advisory board. So we have an advisory board made up of senior partners in Magic Circle firms, financial institutions, New York law firms, development banks, who then we tap and ask to provide us with information about possible lateral hire opportunities, which we then match against our profile book of students in the hope of effectively playing matchmaker, finding people with previous qualifications into jobs where there may be some very specific expertise or experience that are required by employers. The second thing that we've done is for those firms, and on the investment banking side, Lloyd's and Barclays are particularly good examples. For those firms that now recognize the value of the MLF, in addition to practice experience, we've started doing dedicated hiring tracks for those students. So this past year, Lloyd's, for example, did a dedicated hiring round where Lloyd's came and spoke to our students, collected resumes, and then did a day worth of interviews that just involved MLF students with a view to hiring a couple of those students at the end of the process. We're hoping to continue to build on that sort of case study, move it out not only to other financial services firms, but to consulting firms, for example, in the future. But the reality of it is that for lateral hires into the UK, into elite firms, it's a lot of hard work, and the students have as much, if not more, to do with that than we could possibly do. So the best thing to think about is we provide support, but it is not like many undergraduate law channels, training contracts, for example, where there are these huge human resources edifices that are just designed to absorb candidates, select a large number of them, and give them entry-level jobs. We're talking smaller numbers, smaller resources dedicated towards selecting the right candidate, and therefore it's much more incumbent on the candidate in many cases to do the heavy lifting of actually identifying and pursuing those opportunities. Next question. It's the careers section of the portfolio today. I'm interested in working at a private equity firm like Blackstone or KKR, but I come from a law background and have no finance internships, only vacation schemes. How likely am I to be successful? This is the probabilities crowd today. Again, relatively small numbers make it difficult to say with any probability what your chances of success are. I can say at this point we've had one of our former students go to Blackstone, none of our former students go to KKR. You'll see from the information that's available on our website approximately what percentage of our students go into these types of careers historically. That number is less than 10%. Now, is that a question of our students failing to have success with recruitment for these firms, or a reflection of their preference to go to other firms? It's quite difficult for us to say, although my intuition is that given the popularity of things like the finance stream, as the course develops, the demand for those sorts of career paths are going to increase. What we have been doing more recently to help with these sorts of career paths, one, you'll be getting information shortly if you haven't already done so about the Finance Careers online platform that we have, where career services at Oxford and at the business school provide information about the hiring process for finance careers, which include careers in private equity. So that's information enabling you to show up on day one with your CV ready, knowing where you're going to be applying, knowing what services Oxford provides in terms of making connections. And those services are fairly bountiful in many respects. So a lot of firms will come to Oxford just to meet students, either in informal settings like the ubiquitous Oxford cocktail party, or in more formal settings in terms of group or one-to-one meetings that are interviews, except by another name, I suppose. On top of that, then, we are out pounding the pavement on your behalf, myself and Claire Oxenbury-Palmer, our careers officer, attempting to raise the visibility of these programs, well, the MLF specifically, with employers. And we've actually met with Blackstone, met with BlackRock, other big asset managers, with a view hopefully to selling them on what we think is a really big value proposition for the MLF, namely finance skills, plus the ability to understand and interpret the rules of the game. That is the law and regulation within which these firms inevitably have to operate. That's a gradual process, and given both that asset managers don't tend to hire in large numbers in the same way that banks or law firms do, and the fact that there are only 46 of you, again, it's a split of responsibility where we work very hard to find opportunities, but it is ultimately also very incumbent upon the students to work hard to exploit those opportunities as well. So again, a very artful dodging of the answer to the question, if I can say so myself. We've had some success. We're working hard to have more success.
Can I one thing to this
Yeah,
question?
please.
I think one of the pitfalls that I myself and I think also others fell into before coming to Oxford was that I slightly overestimated the impact Oxford has on your CV, particularly in the UK. You should realize that, for instance, at law firms, a third to a half of the associates or partners, almost unfortunately, do come from Oxford and Cambridge. So it doesn't give you as much of a comparative advantage as you might expect. For private equity then, or consultancy, it is marginally less, not much. But there you need to compete with students who have studied finance in undergraduate and, for instance, to the MFE, who are very specialized in this sort of industry or have very specialized knowledge. And you need to ask yourself, why would a firm take you on? The MLF and Oxford in general is absolutely one of the components, and I think the MLF is a good a name as it can be, but it has its natural limits to how much it will help you in an application process. At Clifford, for instance, it will only get you an interview. The interviewer is a blind interview. They have no idea where you come from, and there it will be totally up to you. So the real question I would ask myself is, how helpful is the MLF to get you an interview?
Yeah, one of the things we actually spend a portion of a class on this is sort of what is the asset coming out of Oxford University. Part of the asset can be just the reputation of the CV brand, and I think Tom's right that for these jobs, where effectively the opportunities that these jobs represent really are incredible, and where they really do want the highest possible level of talent, the recruiting strategies have become highly sophisticated. No longer are they looking at the name on your CV, they're looking at what you can actually do. We think that our product is great in being able to provide those skills, but simply having Oxford on your CV is not going to be anything close to the type of entree into that world that it's often expected to be. And the reason for that is quite simple, is that having Oxford on your CV doesn't make you good at anything. You make yourselves good at everything. We think we have selected you, well, you've certainly gone through a rigorous selection process to get an offer. and we're always incredibly impressed by the quality of the CVs and the candidates that come through the program. But that combined with Oxford is not enough. You've got to actually show it. You've got to show up and work hard on the program and take the opportunities that are made available to you. This is all sounding half motivational talk, half sort of you're all screwed and are never going to find a job. The reality is somewhere in the middle, that especially for the top echelon jobs, it's really going to be your burden to show what skills you have, and then it's my burden and the burden of my colleagues to make sure that you're walking into that room with the best possible skill set, the best possible understanding of the issues you're likely to face once you get in there. Next question, could we have more information about each of the finance electives? That would be absolutely ideal, and one of the things that we can do is probably follow up after the fact to see if we can get additional information. One piece of background here, in order to keep the program and curriculum dynamic on the SBS side, the electives change every year. So the content is quite responsive to developments in the marketplace, and as a result, the course offerings tend to get updated in the fall after you've already arrived. Now, from the perspective of people who are thinking about selecting the finance stream, on one hand, this is not ideal. From the perspective of people taking the finance stream, it's actually highly desirable insofar as the content never atrophies. That is to say that what's happening in the markets is rapidly integrated into what's happening into the course. But we will follow up and hopefully be able to provide you with additional information on the content of each of the electives, and indeed which electives will be made available as soon as we possibly can. Please, and there's a number of process questions here about electives. So the first thing to say is that, and a couple of you asked whether there's a lottery, for example, for electives. For law electives, it is simply a matter of indicating your preference, which you are very likely to get, unless the room is too small relative to the demand. And if our administrators are doing our jobs, hopefully we match the rooms to demand. The reality of it is that we've negotiated that for any MLF student taking the core BCL MJUR electives that they generally take, Principles of Financial Regulation, Corporate Finance or Legal Concepts, or Comparative Company Law, is that they're guaranteed a place on those electives. So we've never had a student disappointed there. Things are a little different on the finance stream side, where pure meritocracy prevails. Every year, because we obviously can't plan for how many students are going to take the finance stream, and since they're already integrated into courses that business school students are taking, there is a cap of 10 per course. And so in theory then, if 11 MLF students all wanted to take private equity, for example, as their finance stream elective, the 11th candidate would be out of luck, because they would have gotten the 11th best mark out of that cohort on the exam in First Principles of Financial Economics. So no lottery whatsoever. You're either guaranteed a place or you were edged out on the basis of your academic performance thus far on the MLF. Please let me know by when we have to select our electives. None of this takes place until you've been here and gotten your feet wet and had the opportunity to meet people and learn things about the courses. So we have available, or will soon have available online, podcasts that are designed to help people understand what the individual courses are about. This is available for the law faculty electives and candidates who have accepted their place. There's also an opportunity when you arrive to go and listen to people give mini lectures, effectively designed to give potential students a flavor of what different courses are like, what the substance is like, what the teaching styles of the individual professors are like. You then have a couple of weeks effectively to finalize your options. So it's generally, I think, third week of Michaelmas term when you have to finalize your options. And in fact, even beyond third week, there's a way that you can switch courses if you change your mind. Next question. In your experience, please let me know whether taking more law electives increases the chances of securing a training contract. Do you know, I have never specifically looked at that question from an empirical perspective. And the reason that I probably haven't is that our placement numbers for training contracts are excessively high. So we have the highest placement rating of any graduate program in the UK in terms of training contracts. And it's very close to 100% overall for those that are seeking training contracts. So my guess would be that there's a very low level of variance between those taking more law electives versus finance electives. Next question. These are great questions, by the way, so keep them coming. Will we be able to study any of the subjects on offer, or are there limited places for certain subjects? So again, in terms of the core MLF curriculum electives on the law side, no limits whatsoever. On the finance side, in the theoretical event that more than 10 wanted to take the same elective, there would be this merit-based cutoff. I should say in our first 2 years, this has been a theoretical exercise because no more than 10 have wanted to take any one elective. In the first 2 years, we had 14, and then I think this year 18 or 19 students take the finance stream. And when you divide that across 4 or 5 electives, the reality of it is that only private equity has ever come close to reaching that theoretical cap. Oh, there's follow-up questions now. Okay. This is a related question, although I have to say that in the order that I'm seeing this, I'm not entirely sure yet what question it's related to. Is it productive to qualify oneself in the UK through the QLTS to increase chances of a lateral hire? That's a difficult question for me to really give advice on, to be honest. Part of it is that that's not something that I'm aware of too many students pursuing at all. And there is, and for those of you that don't understand what I'm about to say, you will after a few weeks here, there's a bit of an endogeneity problem there. So is it the fact that it's that candidates who may not be marketable on the lateral hire market at that specific moment in time are choosing to do that option? Or is it that in choosing to do that option, they are somehow limiting their marketability to prospective employers? I don't know. And the numbers are so small that it's difficult to really get a gauge on that. It's certainly not a strategy, so to do the QLTS without any sort of job lined up that we see particularly often. Generally speaking, it's job first, qualification second, or at the very least, in tandem with one another. Next question. Do many MLF students participate in the Oxford Finance Lab program? And could you please describe the process for joining this program? Well, this past year, students weren't given the opportunity to join the finance labs. This was largely due to a scheduling issue that couldn't be accommodated ultimately. We're hopeful, although it's by no means guaranteed to be the case, that the finance labs will be offered next year. We're also in the preliminary stages of hopefully being able to offer a parallel consulting lab for those that are interested. The key will be aligning the scheduling of the students with the scheduling of the labs. These labs are developed as part of the MBA and MFE programs, and insofar as they're on a different schedule to what we're on, it's often difficult to accommodate. The process for joining them is relatively straightforward, assuming that we're able to make that happen. You will receive an invitation to join somewhere around the beginning of the course, and you'll simply have to follow instructions. So from that perspective, it's been something that students have really liked historically. It's something that we hope to offer again, but we're still in the process of ironing out the logistical details of being able to do so. But I wouldn't worry about, in any event, the process for signing up, because knock on wood, we'll make that as easy for you as possible. If we opt for a dissertation, how many contact hours do we get? I think this is really one of the benefits of Oxford is that I think I can speak for all of my colleagues where we don't really think in terms of contact hours. I'm sure somewhere there is a regulation that says your minimum level of contact hours. The reality of it is that I think I probably blow past that in the first meeting for most of my supervisions. If you're interested in a topic and if you are highly motivated to explore it, this is precisely why the people in the program entered academia. That's why we teach. So from our perspective, we get quite jazzed about this sort of thing. And for the students that I've supervised who have done MLF, so taught degree dissertations, I would typically meet with them at least twice a term, if not more so, and typically our supervisions would range from 90 minutes to 2 hours. I'm also, as these guys can attest, frequently to be found in the local law faculty coffee shop where spontaneous supervisions occasionally break out. Okay, next question. From what I've read and heard regarding the MLF so far, due to the intensity of the course, the cohort naturally becomes very close. Finally, a question for you guys. Do MLF students also have time throughout the year to integrate with the rest of the community, such as their college, societies, the Oxford Union, and other extracurricular avenues?
Sure. So I can take that one, and I have definitely had enough time to do all of the above. What was it? Colleges. So because you're a graduate student, you have an MCR, which is a middle common room, and you get to interact with them, and you have enough time to do everything. So I've interacted with my college. I've definitely joined the Oxford Union and been to multiple talks, and those are definitely interesting and worth going to. And in terms of extracurricular, I've had time to start up a society, actually, a negotiation society, and interact with the MBAs, the Master of Public Policy students, and so, yeah, using my time here in a really productive way. And so doing the MLF, it is intensive, but if you manage your time, you definitely have enough time for your extracurriculars and your college activities. Yeah.
I just add to it that it's ultimately a matter of priority. Also in how much you want to engage in any of these courses. I think you can probably spend hours on one particular course and still find things to discuss. You might need to choose the option or the spend time on each of these possibilities to the best of your likings. It's depending on as you will learn in economics and your sentiments on what you prefer most. You will be able to pass the courses and to do good on the courses, to do well, with an amount of time that allows you for extracurricular activities.
Yeah, speaking pragmatically, for most of you coming to join the course, this will be a unique opportunity to take advantage of what is assuredly one of the most unique environments for learning and socializing you will ever come across. And regardless of the demands of the course, I think it hits most people fairly early on that part of the Oxford experience is undeniably taking advantage of these other things outside of the classroom. And it would be going too far to say that we as the course instructors encourage it, but it would be highly disappointing to us for your development as people if you did not also take up those opportunities while you're here. Next question. Are there any special events for the MLF students to meet with London law firms and network? I'm actually going to turn this one over to the students as well to see how they feel in terms of the range of different events that we hold and whether you feel it helps you build the network in London, whether we could be doing more.
Should I start that? Yeah. So I entered the MLF without a training contract. So I was looking for, on the one hand side, the market itself, what is on offer, when to apply, really when are the deadlines, and on the other side, what does Oxford have to offer. So starting with the second side first, you have a range of support. One of the things that Oxford offers is the career service, the central career service. where you have, for instance, mock interviews, CV counseling, and other general consulting sessions to talk about it. The great advantage there is, for instance, that you have, it's called recruiter in residence, I think, where a graduate recruiter comes in from a law firm, does a mock interview with you, which is completely for practice purposes, gives you feedback. This way, not only will you be, can you casually introduce yourself to a new law firm, but also really practice what is ultimately a very important thing in interview skills. Secondly then, you might be able to talk to people who already have a traineeship. There are always a few on the program, as Elizabeth will tell you more about later. But also to just people who have, for instance, worked there for a couple of years. So that's also very useful, in my opinion.
Just in terms of the actual events, so we have some events that are hardwired into the schedule every year. So typically there'll be an alumni event for which we bus everybody down in September, and another one in March. Those will always be held either at or sponsored by big law firms, which provide networking opportunities. There are typically events during the orientation week or the week around orientation week where law firms will invite students out for dinner, sort of as a very informal networking opportunity. And then because of the ubiquitous Oxford cocktail party to which the MLF sort of produces more than its fair share, there'll often be opportunities to meet partners from the firms that then assist us with the program. So I mentioned before the law and economics of corporate transactions. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, these guys every week will be obviously interacting with practitioners from various law firms. So this year we have folks coming in from Hogan Lovells, Sherman Sterling, Slaughter and May, Clifford Chance, and several of them take the opportunity then to host receptions after class to try to get to know people and the candidates a little better. Aside from those things, there are then the career services type networking events and things like that, which I can come back to because I think there's a couple of other questions relating to that a little later on.
I mean, one thing in terms of timing is that there are really two instances when to apply. One is sort of end of Michaelmas.
November, December.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So middle to end of Michaelmas, and the other one would be in May, June.
Yeah.
So, which really means for you, like once you come to Oxford very soon, you will need to, or you have the opportunity to hand in or send out applications. Also, one of the advantages of the MLF is that you have specific law firms, and particularly Clifford Chance, who really targets us and encourages you to apply to them very early on. Such that you can actually already have an offer before you go home for your Christmas vacation.
Yeah. So I already had a training contract before I started the course, but I was really impressed by just the sheer amount of contact that Oxford, the MLF, has with different law firms. Within the first 2 or 3 weeks, I think, we were meeting up with big London law firms, and they were really interested in recruiting MLF students. And it's because the MLF does provide you with a comparative advantage over other prospective graduates.
Yeah, I think particularly with this road career-wise, our advisory board is invaluable because we've been able to educate firms, HR functions. We've been able to sometimes change and indeed create new processes specifically for MLF students. As I think Tom said earlier, the Oxford brand is not particularly saleable in the context of Magic Circle or other London firms because they're all from Oxford and Cambridge anyway. What does make them saleable is a skill set. That is when people show up and have the toolkit to be able to understand the transactions upon which they're working. And in that respect, it's been a fairly straightforward process of selling our value proposition or our students' value proposition along the training contract route to London firms, especially. And that actually answers the next question as well, which is sort of the timing of the opportunities on the training contract front. The short version of the story is start prepping your CV now. That's probably something that's good advice at whatever stage of life you're in, but is particularly important because a lot of the careers heavy lifting for training contracts will take place once you arrive. Once you're here, there'll be support in terms of things like CV polishing, in terms of interview skills. We also have something called the Hogan Levels Mentorship Program that is designed to give people a taste of what it's like to be in transactional practice and how to approach seeking a job in that world. That's all well and good, but it is entirely, the value of it is entirely a function of how prepared you are to take advantage of it. And that means thinking about CVs now, signing up and listening into our careers materials for finance as well as the law firm side of thing, because there's a lot of useful crossover advice there. But yes, first term is the big term for training contract hires, although there is a second and even third round that comes later on in the year. And that from your perspective, having a CV that then the people at Career Services and in our office can go over is what you should be thinking about at this stage.
I mean, this also links back to the question how much time you spend on extracurriculars. If you have to spend time on trying to get a job on the academics plus extracurricular, getting the priorities right is quite difficult.
It's quite tight.
Yeah.
But you can do it.
Yeah. So the more you do up front, the better it is for you later on to enjoy the nice environment in Oxford.
So the next question I have is, please tell us what happens at the various careers fairs on campus. Thanks. Have you guys, Oxford's slightly different than the experience that many of you will have. It's not, people don't have generalist career fairs in the way that you would at an undergraduate level in North America, say, for example. The careers fairs tend to be specific to industry and post. So having that said, I've never been to an Oxford career fair because I have a job. But what has your experience been in terms of those sort of events on offer?
So as you said, it is a very UK style, I thought, very UK style way of recruiting. It lies somewhere between the continental Europe way of doing it, which means you hardly have any law firms, and if they're only there for information purposes, to the US side, where you actually do interviews during these sessions or during these campus fairs. In the UK, you simply go to these fairs where you have one for consultancy, one for finance, and one for law, I think, and I think there's even one for other industries that I wasn't particularly interested in. And you can just talk to the associates and sometimes even partners who are there. I didn't find the fairs to be too interesting. However, given the special recruitment process for traineeships, I think there is a value in that you can talk to associates and drop the names in your application, and this apparently shows them or the HR that you are well prepared and really considered the firm, although all you did is, hi, I'm Tom and I know your firm. But for your own purposes, try to take advantage of it. But it really means walk in there, they are all quite interested in meeting nice people, and once you say you are doing the MLF, you usually got even more interest.
Yeah, for sure. But careers fairs I found are all about you finding out more about the firm. So it's not so much about them trying to recruit you, but them just trying to show you what type of firm they are, and then you getting to know them better. And so that's why I found careers fairs always fascinating, because you get to look at all these different firms and see what they say, their different cultures and freebies, which are nice.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it really means only you understand they are really old corporate firms who try to distinguish themselves, but are very similar after all.
They end up being very similar.
I once got a scooter at a career fair. That is the highlight of my career fair.
A scooter?
A scooter, yeah, like one of the little pushy scooters. It's back in the day. It was before
Do you
the
remember
crisis.
the firm?
Yeah, it no longer exists, oddly enough.
How old were you? You found out it's freebie.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Right.
Yeah, I think the takeaway there is that insofar as career fairs are still useful, it's as an information gathering exercise, and even then, the volume of material that law firms produce is such that the marginal utility of those generalist sort of fairs, relative to some of the bespoke stuff that we put on and we can put on because of our narrow focus, is a relatively minor part of our overall careers offering. I've seen the former students are hired in private international financial institutions. Do you have former students in international organizations such as the World Bank or IMF? Is it possible to obtain internships in those institutions? So we've had, I think to date, on average, maybe one student out of the class a year who ends up with an internship with one of the international institutions. World Bank, IMF, or because of its proximity to where we are, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We've also had a former student go and do an internship at the Asian Investment Bank. It is, again, really incumbent upon the student to pursue those opportunities. We have links with, for example, the credit group at the World Bank, where wherever we can, bring them over to meet our students. But we've found that the students that have been successful in getting those internships really only are really only successful because they then follow up with those opportunities. So for those of you that might not know much about the recruitment for the World Bank, the IMF, for example, they have quite strict and narrow conditions regarding previous qualifications, jurisdiction of call to the bar, jurisdiction of origin, that then from their perspective makes it, and from our perspective, makes the opportunities quite random. That is to say, we might not have a student from that jurisdiction who then did their law degree and met certain qualifications in a given year, full stop, in which case effectively none of our students would be eligible for an internship that year. What we do for students who are interested in these, or what we ask them to do, is to put up their hand and signal to us as early in the year as possible that this is something that they're interested in doing. Again, where we have had success, it's been because of our faculty members' contacts in these institutions. So Kristen Van Zwieten, for example, who teaches insolvency law, sits on one of the steering committees for the World Bank insolvency law stream. And through that connection, we've had some success in the past. We've also had some success on similar grounds with European institutions. So for example, the European Central Bank and European Commission, where again, because of the connections with Oxford faculty members with the policy process, is that there can be opportunities, bespoke opportunities for candidates to enter those type of fields. The one thing I will say is that the program does provide you with a skill set that's incredibly salient for careers in these institutions. And because of how young the program is, it may just be the case yet, and I kind of suspect, given the aspirations of many of our students, that it will be the case ultimately, that we see people going from the program to transactional practice or policy practice in law firms, and then making the jump to these international institutions. That's a far more tried and tested career path than jumping straight from an academic program into the IMF or the World Bank. The next question is sort of very specific, it'll sound, but it's actually a concern that a lot of students have expressed before they've joined the program, so it's probably one that's good to deal with. I've worked 3 years as a lawyer, primarily in the financial sector and analyzing corporate transactions. And I've seen that almost half of the students come directly from undergraduate studies. I'm worried the classes are going to be more basic. What is the level of the classes? Are they intended for students that already have relevant work experience? This, of course, is always going to be a challenge because of the heterogeneity of the people that come onto the course. So at one end of the spectrum, we have people with pure undergraduate degrees in law and no finance background. And at the other end of the spectrum, we may have people who have several years of transactional experience and some finance background to boot. There are a number of things that nevertheless make this course worthwhile at both ends of that spectrum. The first, and Tom touched upon this earlier, is that the integration of law and finance as a field is not something that you get anywhere else. This is the difference between doing an LLM program in the United States, between doing the Cambridge MCL, for example, is that it's the integration, true integration of financial concepts with legal knowledge in a transactional setting that sets the course apart. I go into law firms and teach associates and partners elements of this course. It's not something that exists outside of the limited scope of the people who teach it here. And as a result, it's new for everybody. And there are challenges to that. You heard earlier that, especially when we talk about first principles of financial economics, even for people with economics backgrounds, the way that we teach it to maximize relevance for people who are ultimately interested in the law and its interaction with finance means that people can initially struggle. Now, the other way to put that, though, of course, is that hard work is for a reason. And that's because it pays big dividends later on once you start to make those connections. And once you're able to look at things more holistically, it's our experience that even the people who are coming from many years of transactional practice ultimately then leave with insights that they definitely didn't have coming in. At the other end of that, there's sort of the opposing concern, which is that I'm 22, I'm just coming out of undergraduate. Is this all going to be overwhelming? Not because I'm not really, really smart, because you're all really, really smart, trust me. I've spent more time with your CVs and applications than I would ever care to admit. But because you don't have the context necessary to understand the theoretical tools. And this is something that you may recall I talked about at the outset when I talked about the building up of case studies in my course, The Law and Economics of Corporate Transactions. Even if you're a 22-year-old coming fresh out of undergrad, if I can make you understand Akerlof's adverse selection model in the context of buying or selling a used car, and then build on that to the sale of a private company, and then build on that in terms of understanding the various contractual structures at the heart of structured finance or securitization, that in the process of building up the case studies to an additional degree of complexity, the goal is effectively to bring those students without necessarily a lot of context along with us to make sure that they're not falling behind simply because they just haven't seen and done it in practice yet. So we're quite cognizant of that. We think that that's a good pedagogical strategy for making sure that the lessons of the course are accessible to absolutely all 45 candidates in the course. And I think this holds up. Obviously, I can't share with you all of our sort of performance data over the 6 years of the course. But whether you have PQE, whether you have a finance background or not, is not particularly predictive of how well you do in the course. That's to say that we have had exceptional people that have come from across the entire range of experiential sort of background in terms of both law and finance. And so we think that we take that as a pretty good indicator that we're catering to everybody in this regard. I have one thank you. Thank you very much for the thank you. Okay, I hope this question doesn't get too personal. I've read ahead, so I decree it not to be. But would you have any great tips on how to finance the tuition fee and stay at Oxford? This isn't too personal, and I'll open it to you guys, not knowing what your own personal circumstances were, and you can pass entirely. One of the undeniable challenges of spending a year at Oxford is the cost. And to compound that, of course, for those of you who haven't read the fine print, we technically don't allow people to work while they're here in Oxford. We try to address this in various ways. We have a number of needs-based scholarships for candidates. We currently have 2, and we'll hopefully have more internships offered by law firms in the near future. But for the vast majority of you, you are all relying on scholarships or personal savings in order to fund your time here at Oxford. Now, one of the things we could probably follow up with, I think, outside of this context is sort of how to live in Oxford on a budget. I think a town like Oxford is really 2 towns in one, and you've got to make tough choices, I think. I think the university is generally or can be a very expensive place, but there are lots of parts of Oxford that are absolutely lovely and where life in general is considerably cheaper. And it always breaks my heart that many students, especially those here for a year, don't realize that there's bridges and that on the other side of those bridges are some of the coolest and nicest and least expensive parts of the city, thinking of East Oxford in particular. So I think that might be something that we want to follow up with and send something around or publish something on the website where we talk about sort of practical strategies for thinking about how to survive. I myself am very sort of cognizant of this issue. I realize that for all of you, regardless of whether you've got a scholarship or not, the risk of spending an extra year of study combined with the financial risk is something that is not to be taken lightly. Did you guys want to pipe in on that at all?
Just saying the personal cost should not be underestimated that you have in Oxford, which probably you said. I said mainly in the hub of Oxford, which is due to the fact that I live on campus. But the figures the university provides and the minimum requirement you need for living in Oxford is really the absolute minimum you need, and I would say sometimes even more. On the other hand, how you finance it, I found looking at scholarships relatively tricky, and I was not able to obtain one myself. So you would need to look on the websites and potentially the email sent out from your college whether you are considered for a scholarship. Other than this, I don't think I have much to add.
Somebody's thinking of the real practicalities now. How cold is it in Oxford? I've heard that it rains a lot and is usually quite grey.
Yeah.
Well, there's no denying that. I grew up on the west coast of Canada, and I used to be a completely different shade of human being. I've lived here for 8 years now, and I occasionally get scared of the big fiery ball that appears in the sky once every fortnight. There are 3 seasons in Oxford. One is grey and dark, which essentially starts from about November and ends, well, probably at the end of March. There is the season that begins right about now, which I suppose here we would just call summer 8s, which is 2 months where Oxford starts to bloom. We get barbecues and everybody wanders around in rowing lycra for 2 months. And then there's the silly season, tourist season, which sort of starts in June and ends in September, where it is also still quite sunny often, although mixed with heavy bouts of good English summer rain. But it doesn't really matter because you're not here. There is no doubt you would probably have cause to sue me for misrepresentation if I said that Oxford was anything but cold and dark in the wintertime. However, I like to think there's a certain stoic dignity, especially when matched with the architecture and the gravitas associated with the institution, that comes from spending a year in what is undeniably one of the darker corners of human civilization.
It encourages studying, though.
It does encourage studying quite a bit.
It decreases the outside option or the opportunity cost you have by staying in your room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having to think about Akalov.
Yeah, there's that's probably the best way to think about it. What clearly Mother Nature has done has limited the external stimuli during the most heavily sort of intensive study months of the year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's still a gorgeous city. I mean, when it's not raining and it's just cold and gray, you can still walk around. The architecture is stunning, no matter what, and you'll love it.
We should
the
say
weather isn't so, you're not so dependent on the weather in the city, I think.
There are certain benefits, yes, absolutely. Oxford is a stunning city. London is actually extremely close because of the transport links. So there's a bus that leaves every 20 minutes that goes right into central London. Equally grey, but infinite in terms of the various distractions that you can find once you get there. 6 years, I've never gotten a question about the weather. That's fantastic.
So is this why you're leaving Oxford now on your sabbatical? Because of the weather?
I am going to spend my sabbatical in Singapore, Sydney, New York, Toronto, and Tokyo. So at least latitudinally, a very wide range of different locations, yes. That seems to be all the questions that we have today. The only other thing that I wanted to sort of alert everybody to, and this was, well, actually it was the last thing that we were talking about, is that don't be scared, but when you arrive in the fall, I'm going to be replaced by a taller, suaver, and far more intelligent Italian gentleman by the name of Professor Luca Enriquez, who's the Allen & Overy Professor of Company Law here at Oxford. He will be taking over the academic directorship of the MLF effective next year. For those of you who may not have heard of Luca's work, Luca's done, in addition to being a former director at CONSOB, the Italian Securities and Exchange Commission, he's done fantastic work in the area of public company and securities law regulation. And he's actually one of my fellow co-authors on the book, Principles of Financial Regulation, which you can now co-order or pre-order on Amazon, which just happens to be the textbook that we use for the course, Principles of Financial Regulation. I've got a note that says give 1 minute before you close the session. What would you like to use it for?
I wanted to say that if you have any questions that you haven't asked yet to us, or particularly when it comes to choosing between different courses you got an offer to, I'm happy to talk to you about, also questions more in general. You can reach me via my email address, which I'm not sure you have or not, otherwise on LinkedIn or Facebook. Maybe you'd be able to distribute the names.
We're able to send out information after the fact, so we can include your name if you're willing. Yeah.
I mean, you will find me in the profile book. I haven't changed much since the photo was taken. And happy just, Google my name, you'll find me. But, consider that I'm also studying and have exams up. But for any salient questions, I'm very happy to help you out with, even after today's session.
Yeah, the same goes for me, because when you're in this position, you probably are juggling multiple different offers, or just the decision, do you want to take this year out to study it? And so, yeah, we're definitely available if you have any more questions about the practicalities or how you balance the different considerations. And
I suppose I should close it off then by saying you're also very welcome to contact, as many of you have already done, the @MLF or the MLF @law email address with specific questions. Obviously, that address, we're able to really answer questions relating more to the mechanics of the course and questions like student aid, for which there are many questions today that are difficult to answer, obviously, in a group setting. But for questions regarding the very important decision that you're making right now, it's the students. And if you like what they have to say in terms of it draws on your own experience and intuitions for applying to the program, then that's probably the best indicator of whether the program is for you or not. Ultimately, we want everybody who comes here to feel really confident in the choice that they've made. We think that the product is fantastic, and we acknowledge that the product isn't necessarily for everyone. So hopefully this session has helped you in some way make that decision about Oxford as a university, but more importantly about the MLF as the substantive area that you want to be studying, hopefully in the fall of this year. So I will be around next fall despite my constant jet setting around the globe. I look forward to meeting some, if not all of you, at the MLF Welcome Dinner sometime in the fall. So thanks again for your questions. Thanks again to you guys for your time, and have a great day.